We're really excited this evening. For those of you who have been on with us before, we've always picked an interesting spot in the museum, or we tried once outside to film something.
Yeah, that was kind of.
But tonight, we are filming for the very first time from the new Lydia Ziegler Clare Education Center on the first floor of the museum. This has been a project that we've been working on. We've had in mind for years, but has only really come to fruition in about the last year to build a flexible classroom space here on the first floor of the museum that we can do small group programs, but then also have the capability to do programs like this and take the message of the museum beyond the four walls of the museum and the borders of Gettysburg out into the world. So we finally just got all of the technology put together earlier
yesterday?
Wednesday.
Yeah.
So this is the first time that we're able to do something from in here, and I may try to use some of the technology we have.
Oh, please, let's try and see. We're amongst friends tonight.
We are. So we wanted to share this all with you as we move forward tonight. So we're going to talk about a audience suggested topic this evening. Last month we talked about women's roles, nurses in hospitals, and towards the end, at one point we talked about Camp Letterman, and towards the end of the presentation, somebody said, "Well, why don't you do a program on Camp Letterman?" So here we sit this evening to talk about Camp Letterman, and as we talk, we're going to actually be able to bring in a lot of what we talked about last month and women's roles, and the greatest description of Camp Letterman comes from a diary by a female nurse named Sophorina Bucklin, and I've spent a lot of time reading her writings over the last couple of days, and I'm going to be reading from that. But she talks about what women are doing in camp. She has a really great perspective on what's going on there. So we'll hear about that, and we'll tie it in between last week and last month and this month. So let me get my notes. Anything to add?
No, Pete.
Ed.
Ed. Yes, I'm Ed McMahon to Pete's Johnny Carson tonight. This is right in Pete's wheelhouse. So I've got a few comments I'll make about some of the Confederates who end up in Camp Letterman. But this is and talk a little bit about nursing and science and medicine. So, but it's kind of a cool site. I drive by Camp Letterman's site just about every day.
And I bet a lot of people who come to Gettysburg have too, and maybe not even noticed it because. And actually, I was going to end with this quote, but I think it's a good place to start. Daniel Skelly, who's a boy at the time of the battle, writes his memoirs years later, and he writes, "It has always been a wonder to me that the government, when it was acquiring the historic fields on which the battle was fought, did not buy these woods or one of the most historic and sacred spots on the field." And today, we'll see a map in a few minutes, but there is one marker today. There's Camp Letterman Drive.
So next to the sheets.
Up next to the sheets at 15. But other than that, there is really no mention of it, and a good bit of it has already been built over, and we'll show that map in a second. But why? I wanted to start with, the way that I structured this was to go through the old who, what, when, where, why, how.
Well, that's a good place to start.
It's a good place to start, and there are two major factors that make up the why. Why was this camp founded? And we need to start, kind of dive into first miasmatic theory, what people are thinking caused diseases in the 19th century, but then we also have to look at notions at the time of moving patients and what would happen if you moved a patient too quickly. So miasmatic theory, just to give a brief overview, is the idea, and this is the prevailing notion in the 19th century of how diseases spread. This is before germ theory was widely accepted, but it's the idea that disease is spread through bad air or rotting vegetables, offal from
dead
animals, excrement, that if you are smelling that and inhaling that, that is how you are receiving the disease. So, of course, to counter that is to have an abundance of fresh air, and hospitals were supposed to be well ventilated, as ventilated as possible, and field hospitals and general hospitals were set up to be places that would be in sunlight and would have an abundance of fresh air. So
this is a great point, because scientists and doctors are slowly moving towards this germ theory. They don't quite understand what the mechanism of disease transmission is, but they certainly have a sense there's something in the air that they can't see that is causing this disease, or the disease outbreaks that you're seeing. And this is, being able to look at medicine. We do this all the time. We talk about this all the time, right? Looking at what happens in the Civil War, in medicine and in the advancement of scientific knowledge is a fantastically important field of study, to understand how modern medicine develops and how quickly things change between 1865 and the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, it's a different world, and a lot of the knowledge and a lot of the theories that doctors and scientists are working with come out of these observations that they're making during the war. They're taking these lessons and turning them into something practical.
And the idea that, cleaning up camps to get rid of the bad smell, or putting the latrines way far away so as to reduce the smell, was helping, of course, because now the contagions that are actually the things that are causing disease, the germs, are being mitigated. So as we go through and we talk about the makeup of Camp Letterman, just kind of keep that in mind, that this is how people are making sense of their world, and it factors into how the camp is set up.
Because all of us, and I'll say this, if I said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. We all have an interpretive toolbox that we work with, and that is the most profound thing that I learned in graduate school, is look at the interpretive toolbox that people have at the time, and then study from that perspective on, and then we learn something historical rather than just historic. So it's a very helpful, and I love, even though I'm not the staff expert on medicine, I love talking about it, because you've got contingency within this, you've got experimentation, you've got observation, you've got all of the elements of science, which, when you get down to it and start thinking about the late 19th, early 20th century theories on history, it's the same kind of observational model. It's kind of the foundation for all of the modern university, the modern way of understanding the world around us.
So the other thing that's happening during this time is surgeons during the Civil War are recognizing that they cannot move people too quickly. And this you see a lot in the writings of Jonathan Letterman, who is one of the greatest figures, maybe unsung figure of the Civil War era. He is the medical director of the Army of the Potomac from the summer of 1862 through the summer of 1864. And he writes his memoirs, Medical Recollections, right after the war. And he talks about the Battle of Antietam and setting up the first general hospitals ever to be established in the Civil War are at Antietam in September of 1862. And he writes about how they wanted soldiers to be able to regain as much health as possible before moving. Camp Letterman is not set up because there's a transportation problem. And I think that there's a prevailing idea today that because of the sheer number of wounded soldiers that they needed this camp. And that's not the case. It was because they didn't want to move people before they were ready to be moved. And one of my favorite, I'm going to show this because it's my favorite statistical sheet from the Battle of Gettysburg. And I only discovered this a couple of years ago. But this shows the number of patients that were evacuated from Gettysburg on the single rail line, mind you, between July 7th, when the rail line was repaired, because the one rail line that leaves out of Gettysburg, which is still there today. If you're driving along Route 30 and you pass the Giant on your left, if you're coming into town, if you look to the right, you'll see the train tracks, and that's was the Gettysburg, Hanover, and Hanover Junction Railroad, and it's torn up by whites Comanches that come through Gettysburg and actually make it all the way to Hanover Junction right before the battle, and it takes Herman Haupt, who's the second
motion, yeah, I agree,
of the Civil War, the military civil engineer who's able to put railroads back together really quickly. He's able to put the railroad back together by July 7th, and they're able to start evacuating soldiers. And it's amazing to look at this because between July 7th at 5 p.m. and July 22nd at 4 p.m., so a little over 2 weeks, 11,425 soldiers are evacuated out of Gettysburg. So the capacity exists to move these soldiers quickly. And I say quickly because of looking at this. I think that this is a miracle almost. And on one day, July 9th, 2,073 soldiers are evacuated. So the men that are going to remain in Camp Letterman for, in some cases, up to 4 months after the battle, are the ones that are not healthy enough to move. And this all happens, everything that you see on this sheet is happening before Camp Letterman even opens. Camp Letterman is not open for business until July 22nd. So this is all when field hospitals were in town. We're here up at the seminary.
I mean, up to this point, this is the largest concentration hospital on the battlefield.
Second Corps is probably
Second Corps
is probably the biggest, but this is going to become the biggest, other than Letterman. Yeah. So again, this is in the Medical and Surgical History of the War of the Rebellion, page 27. Fantastic little bit of statistics right there. So that's why is it established? Because we've got about 4,000 guys that are still left here in town that cannot be moved and need to be cared for until they can be moved. Where? I'm going to share my screen again here because I can. And we're going to be looking at some maps. And Rob, you can see that picture, correct? Yeah, it's showing, okay. So here is a map that was drawn, I think it's in 2005, and it shows where Camp Letterman was in relation to what's there right now, mostly. This mobile home park, Gettysburg Park Association, is not there anymore. But you can see it's mostly on between where the Giant is today and where it's not called Peebles Plaza anymore. It's Marshall's, and Staples isn't there, but where the Starbucks and the wine store and the beer mart are. Yeah. That's how my life. That's how my point of reference there. But it's rather large. It's going to cover about 80 acres, and this had been the farm of a man named George Wolfe. And Wolfe, by the time that Camp Letterman is established on July 22nd, Wolfe had been no stranger at that point to having men camp on his land. There had been a military encampment in 1862 on his farm, and then John Gordon's brigade.
Gordon's fellows are right there. Yeah.
Are going to camp there on the evening of the 26th to the morning of the 27th of June, when they passed through on their way to York and Wrightsville. So it was a desirable spot. And again, you have a nice hill with good airflow. You have a spring that can be good water sources right there, good drainage. So if it rains, it's going to roll downhill and is not going to stay too long. So pretty good site. And then, of course, maybe most importantly for what's going on here in evacuation is you have the rail line here that is going to be able to take patients out and bring supplies in. And you can see there was one, maybe it's not on this map, but there was a sanitary commission depot. Oh yeah, here it is. This first sanitary commission lodge. There was a depot that was established to bring supplies off.
You know, the thing you're talking about all the advantages of this, and it's important to come back to this notion of airflow.
Yep.
And when you're looking at the prevailing winds in Gettysburg, they're coming from the southwest to the northeast. And when you get onto that hill, and the land to the left of if you're looking at the map, the land to the left of the railroad gets flat. It's out the area where Gordon where Early's division attacks on July 1st. Really flat land down in the Marsh Creek Valley.
Yeah.
If you come back to the if you're looking to the left corner of the map, you're coming back down towards Marsh Creek. So you're looking at Rock Creek. You're looking at land that's kind of low and marshy. So this is up at the top of the ridge. It's not absolutely at the top of the ridge. So you get a nice breeze. You get you get a lot of sunlight there. It really is an ideal place to put a hospital that comports with the ideas that Letterman has put out in his circulars regarding the Army of the Potomac, and also the hospital stewards manual. I mean, it really is. You can go there today. There's a photograph I want to share a little bit later. That you can stand on the York Road and look up, and you can see exactly where the photograph was taken.
I think I have that
really
picture.
is.
But before I want to show this one first.
Yeah.
So this is a picture that's taken by the Tyson brothers in August of 1863. And this is taken from right down the hill, from where the photographer is standing. If he turned around, he'd be looking right in the front door of the Schmucker House, which is where our offices are on the ridge. What's really cool is that if you look up here, you can see the tents. So there's Camp Letterman right there. If you're familiar with Gettysburg, we're looking at the Hagerstown or the Fairfield Road right here, Middle Street. So just to kind of give you some idea of where we're looking. But yeah, again, you see down in town, up on a hill. So it kind of hammers that hill idea home. So a couple of more descriptions of what Letterman looked like. It was in the rear of a deep wood, 1.5 miles from town. Another quote here from Letterman: "Absolute necessity of a full and constantly renewed supply of fresh air." So if you take one thing away from what we're talking,
fresh air, circulation. Really, it's yeah.
So I'm gonna stop sharing for just a moment here so you can see our smiling faces. So who was there? Who was working there? So by the time that Camp Letterman is open, it's about 3 weeks after the battle, and most of the major surgeries had been done already. So the men that are going to be, there is of course going to be operations done. We'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes, but this is not sort of the pell-mell that you see in the immediate aftermath of the battle. And you read some of those accounts of what doctors are facing in the immediate aftermath, where it's just hundreds and hundreds of soldiers needing amputations. That's not happening here. There are emergencies, but you get the impression, I'll read some quotes later on, that you're very kind of,
it's very systematic.
And where I had another quote where I'll have to find it, where it's talked about where Buckland says that all of this is very routine and methodical and like the work of a housekeeper, which talk about domestic issues.
Yeah, the domestication of labor, the hospital stewards manual that comes into this. I mean, it's just it really is looking at the photographs of Camp Letterman, it's pretty well photographed. I mean, it's very well documented. It's very systematic. It's very well organized. You can see that there's tremendous attention to circulation, not just on the hill, but also in and around the tents themselves. You'll see when you see the photographs, you see that there's they're well spaced. That's a great example right there of that. It looks like a regular Army camp as it's laid out. So there's distance. There's distance between the tents. You can see the tent here in the front, and then the one just to the left. You've got the fly open. There's some elevation that's going on with some of the tents where you can get circulation underneath the tents. So you can see the drainage ditches that are being built. You can see the wide avenues that are keeping the tents apart from each other. And I think that the evergreen boughs are really interesting to look at here too, because these are ways to mitigate against some of the smells that you're going to encounter. And so you got evergreen boughs. You've got efforts at mediating the immediate olfactory issues that are going to come with a Civil War hospital.
So it's very well put together in that you have these 6 double rows of tents. Mm-hmm. The tents are designed, as Darryl said, to promote airflow. You can open up the sides even in the summer and the fall, but they're also able to be heated. So even at the time that this is going on, it's August, it's July and August, but they're thinking long term, and they're thinking, November, it's going to be cold. We need to have some way to heat these things.
Even if you look at it, and I'm not sure if we have any photographs that illustrate this specifically, but you can see on the sides of the tent, you'll see a fly that goes over the top of the tent itself. That allows for the sides of the tents and the fronts of the tents to be lifted up, mm-hmm. to be rolled up and provide ventilation even more than what you're seeing in this image right here. So there's a fly tent that's over the regular tent that allows for even greater air circulation than what you're seeing right here.
And they're spread apart, 10 feet apart, about 8 to 12 men to a tent, and then they're also sectioned into wards. So each ward is going to have its own group of people, of workers that are going to be able to care for it. So as Buckland keeps talking about, she keeps saying that everybody had their role, everybody knew what they were supposed to do. So and I guess this is a good time to talk about that. So I'm going to be drawing a lot from this account, because it's so fantastic, and I recommend that if you are looking for more about Letterman, you can see my sort of well-worn copy here, but even just about female work and nursing work in general, in hospital and camp, a woman's record of the thrilling incidents among the wounded in the Civil War, Sophronia Buckland. And I know Annette's probably, if Annette hasn't read this yet, she's writing it down, or she's going to text me soon after.
She's just going to come to your office. And
what was the name of that? What was the name of that book you
She's not going to read it because you got all the little yellow flags.
So
to the good part.
She talks about, she arrives, she is a nurse with the Sanitary Commission from Alexandria, Virginia, and she comes to Gettysburg. And initially she's told by Dorothea Dix that she cannot come because she was not of the right demographic. You had to be over a certain age and look a certain way, and she didn't fit. But she came anyway, and finally in the end does get permission from Dix to come here. But she arrives in Gettysburg, and initially she's sent up here. She's told to come to the seminary hospital. Well, she gets here up to the seminary, and there's talk of, well, we're going to close that hospital down, so you're needed over at Camp Letterman. Of course, the seminary hospital is going to be open for about 2 months more, but she goes over to Letterman, and that's where she is going to serve her time. And by the time she gets there, she talks about seeing 500 tents already set up. So a lot more than what you see in that image there. And one of the things that I like to talk about, especially with students, is all of the support work that goes into running these hospitals. That it's not just soldiers and surgeons, and that's it. You have to think about, how are these men getting fed? How are these men getting washed? What's happening to their gear? How are the rooms getting cleaned? And there's this whole sort of substructure of what's making a hospital function. And it's like today, you go into a hospital today, and there are the doctors and the patients, but then there is all of the other people there, and that's not something that is is new. It happens during the Civil War. So Buckland starts by working at spends a lot of her time, writes a lot about working at the government kitchen. And there are 9 times a day that these female nurses are going out and giving food and giving beef tea and stimulants. And one of the things that I was able to pull here, we'll show this. And I think I can zoom. You know what this is.
Yeah, that's cool.
This is the diet table for General Hospitals, United States Army. So based on what a patient is ordered by the doctor to have, you have all of these different full diet, half diet, chicken diet, low diet, beef tea diet, and then extra diet. So
I want the extra diet.
you want that? The beef steak,
yeah,
and the eggs, and
the beef steak and the eggs.
Yeah. So every day they would have to prepare these meals and go around and administer and give the food based on what the surgeon had ordered. So she writes about having they serve beef tea 3 times a day, stimulants 3 times a day, and then extra diet 3 times a day. So each woman is going around to 200 men 9 times. So that's what's taking up a lot of the day, as you could imagine. And by this time she's saying it's the regular routine. This was the quote I was looking for. The regular routine of hospital life was like the methodical operations of a thorough housekeeper. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
She first of all is giving us a great window into how the structure that's been put in place to make this place run, but she's comparing it to the domestic work that she would be used to.
And,
right.
and it's not just domestic work, but it's middle class domestic work.
Yeah.
This is definitely, there's definitely a class inflection here. These are women who can get up and go.
Right.
Right. I mean,
they have the luxury.
That's the luxury of being able to go and provide that domestic labor for somebody else.
Right.
It puts them in they're very privileged folks in general. These are from these comments that are coming from these women who are able to volunteer are coming from a very specific class perspective.
Yes.
It's not working women who are doing this kind of nursing.
And if they are, you see lower class women and African Americans are relegated to the dirty washing.
Again, very class inflected. Where you are in society overdetermines where you function within this very complicated social nexus.
Yeah. And I think of people like Ellen Orbison Harris, who comes here. She's Ladies Aid Society of Philadelphia. And you look at pictures of her, and she is like the most well put together person that you'd ever see in the 19th century. And here she's coming to do this, but you can tell her class just by looking and
it kind of gets to the religious benevolence. I mean, there's definitely, especially amongst the Christian Commission, the Sanitary Commission, and most likely amongst the women who are volunteering outside of those contexts, a very religiously infused notion of what women are supposed to be doing and how women are functioning in the world, and it's part of this benevolence that develops as a part. And we'll talk about this on Tuesday. The benevolent empire in reformism that really surges as a result of evangelical religion in the middle part of the 19th century. So these are all experiences that are very much interconnected. They're not separate out. They're not distinct. They are very much a part of a larger set of cultural norms and cultural expectations.
So what she's not doing, and again, this is something you think about nursing, and I think that a lot of times the concept of nursing that we think of is of course colored by what nurses do today. But Buckland writes that she is not dressing wounds, that the idea of actually performing some sort of even minor, and so she does say that in the beginning that they might be helping with dressing wounds, but even minor medical procedures are left out of this. That the nursing that she is doing is all of this domestic work. So when the food is done, or when she has time in between 9 times going around and giving food, they're washing faces, combing hair, and making sure that the bedding and the clothing are kept clean. So that's the whole. It's going to take up the entire day to do all of that. And so that sort of gives you an image into what basically everyday life is looking like in this camp. I want to talk about some other sort of abnormal things that are going on in the camp. And one of them, the first one that I want to talk about, gets back at this idea of learning about the human body by looking at in this time period. So let me share again. I want to go to whiteboard. And so I look at this picture, and there is an amazing series of photographs that are taken at Camp Letterman. It seems like there's almost a photograph for every occasion.
Yeah.
But this one has really is really interesting, and I'm going to read just a passage here from Buckland, where it talks about well, you'll see. One fine-looking fellow, a son of Erin's Isle, whose name was Peter Brock, was provoked by the neglect and declared with emphasis that he would have his wounded shoulder examined by a surgeon. If he could get one to look at it, there lie would go where he could. That doesn't make sense. He finally succeeded by perseverance in obtaining an examination. He was found to be in very critical condition, and one of the surgeons was called in till a regular council of doctors was held over him in the ward. It was found necessary to take off a section of the bone, and the operation was begun in full view of the other patients. After mangling him there for time, partly holding him under the influence of chloroform, they removed him to the amputating room, where they paused a while to have their photographs taken, the suffering patient lying in this critical condition. My blood boiled at the cruelty of the scene, but I could not avert the torture for a moment. For 3 hours, he was kept under the knife and saw, and I was directed to hold my peace. He was brought back to his bed as white as a dead man in his coffin, no semblance remaining of the ruddy-cheeked soldier who lay there 3 hours before, with strength in every part of his body, save his wounded shoulder. I think that this is the image that she is talking about, or at least one of the images, because you can see
it lines up too well.
That here is the man's face. So they're obviously doing a surgery on his shoulder, and so it's always fascinating when, to me and probably to others, that when you find a written description of that lines up almost directly with a photograph here. And yes, I wonder, I question her interpretation that this is being done just for, it almost sounds like she's saying that they're doing it for fun, that they're keeping this guy under the knife just so they can kind of, it's gory and they want to take these photos. But in the context of thinking about how doctors are learning about the human body and taking opportunities to learn and gain knowledge about the human body, this story begins to make a little bit more sense, because, and I'm just going to erase these here so we can see his face a little bit better. This might be an example of being able to use this case of learning about the human body. Of course, we see these guys standing around watching this operation. You can see people are really looking intently at what's going on. So, there's the old adage, you never want to be in a surgery where other people are going to say, "Oh my God, I got to see that." But there's something to be said about maybe this is adding to these doctors, and we look at the guys over here. Is it adding to their knowledge and helping them learn for the next case? So interesting, and you see plenty of other surgeries photographed. In fact, if we were not doing this program in this room tonight, we would have been up on the third floor
Yep.
where we have it blown, another one like this blown up.
With that image, yeah.
With not with this exact one, it's the one of the leg amputation, but
Right.
it's similar. And the idea that also that there are numerous doctors that are brought into to counsel on this, and that was another thing that is coming out as an advancement during the Civil War as part of Jonathan Letterman's reforms, is that no one surgeon is going to make the determination on an amputation or a course of care. That in order for an amputation to be done, that at least 3 doctors have to come together and make the decision, yes or no. So we can see that happening here as well, that they're making the decision as a committee.
And what do you not see here?
Females.
Women.
Yep.
There are no women in this image.
Yep.
This is the,
Yep.
you know, when you think of nurses in a modern sense, say a post-1940 sense, this is an image that would almost be unimaginable. I mean, it's all men, and many of these non-commissioned, or the enlisted or non-commissioned men who are standing around are the nurses. They're the ones who are doing they're lifting the stretchers up off of the operating table to move people around. They're cleaning, they're picking stuff up. It's just so there's a distinction, and you made this very clear. There's a real distinction between nursing and the work that women nurses are doing in the hospitals. And this, you can see it in Confederate sources. You can see it most certainly in examples from Georgia, in the big hospitals down in central Georgia. The heavy dependence on African American enslaved men working in these hospitals to do the kind of work that you're seeing right here being done by white enlisted soldiers in the United States Army.
So I want to talk about 2 other events. One is short, but I had to bring it up because and then maybe you can talk about your Confederate connection.
Yeah, there's some Confederates in here. Well, if you notice, remember to look back at the list of people who were sent off.
Yeah.
The Confederates are all going to Baltimore or New York, so they're all going to Point Lookout, or they're going to Elmira.
Yes. Yeah. So this is another quote, and she sees John Burns arrive at the camp. The old hero of Gettysburg, John L. Burns, came up through our camp with tottering steps, anxious to see live rebels. He gazed on them as though uncertain of their connection with the human species, and went hobbling away, his old wife following in his footsteps. So one of the people that he may have seen was
Sanford Branch. The Branch brothers are something of a famous family of Confederates. If you've ever been to the Atlanta History Center, you've seen the Branch collection, a large collection of three-dimensional objects that came down through the family. In this photograph, if you're looking at it, the soldier on the right in the cot is Sanford Branch, and he was a member of the 8th Georgia, part of Ty Anderson's brigade. He's wounded on July 2nd and ends up at Camp Letterman recuperating, and then becomes a prisoner of war. And that's Sanford
right here,
right there. That's Sanford himself. Member of the Oglethorpe Light Infantry, one of the early volunteering companies from Savannah, Georgia. He is a clerk, and this is one of the things that's interesting when you start looking at and thinking about the connections between Confederate soldiers and slavery. Well, it was Hamilton, Sanford, and John Branch. John was killed at Manassas. Hamilton ends up being a member of a late Georgia regiment that fights in the Army of Tennessee. And Sanford is in the 8th Georgia, and these are none of the Branch brothers, none of those 3 brothers would have shown up on the 1860 census as slaveholders. Sanford worked as a clerk in Savannah, but his father was one of the largest slaveholders in Chatham County. So when we start thinking about what these patterns look like, who are the guys in Robert E. Lee's army? Well, they're people like Sanford Branch. They're the sons of planters or planters themselves, but by and large, sons of planters. Branch recovers. He's actually wounded first at the First Battle of Manassas, and recovers. Comes back to the Army. He's wounded somewhere down around the Trobriand Avenue on the
Wheatfield.
yeah, just south of the wheat field. Anderson's guys never really get that far into it, but he's wounded. And ends up at Camp Letterman. The interesting thing with this photograph is that you're telling stories about thinking about really cool stories that you read about. And then you find a photograph of the individual. Well, in this case, you have a case where you have a fantastic image of the soldier in a very specific place, and then all of or a large collection of his three-dimensional objects, his uniform coat, his shoes, and things. They end up in a collection that is donated to the Atlanta History Center. So you can go to the Atlanta History Center today and see Hamilton and Sanford's uniforms and equipment and some letters. It's really kind of a fascinating look into what these guys are about from their social background. And then being able to encounter their three-dimensional objects. But I'll say one thing. This is about the tents themselves. You can see here very clearly how the tents could be opened up. You can see a little bit over to the left. It appears that where you see the bottoms of the tent rolled up, and then very clearly over here to the left, between the fellow standing up and the guy with a long beard. You can see that tent fly that goes over the tent that allows for this larger opening or closing, depending on what the weather is. And we don't know who the woman in the photograph is. We don't know if this is one of the women who has come and volunteered, or if she is perhaps a family member who has been able to come north to take care of a wounded relative. So, if these guys are all from the 8th Georgia, they're all pretty wealthy fellas from pretty wealthy families. And by and large, Robert E. Lee's army is that way. So it's a fascinating picture in a lot of ways, from the ways that we can see how the ventilation works, the ways that the tents are arranged, the individual himself. Who is the woman that's in the photograph? But these are all Confederates in this image. They're all soldiers who are eventually going to go to Elmira or Point Lookout.
And you brought up an interesting point. Whoop. Okay. I wanted to show one other thing. I don't even know. You probably don't even know that I have this. But it adds to the idea of people coming from.
Yes, yeah. That's super cool. That's one of the coolest things.
So what I'm putting up here right now, this is a hand-drawn map that is in the collection of the National Civil War Museum up in Harrisburg. And we have a facsimile of it on display here in Seminary Ridge Museum on the 3rd floor. But what this is a map sent to a Confederate family as to where their soldier was buried. And you can see very clearly on the bottom right here, it's York Turnpike, Gettysburg, off to the left right there, and then the Central Railroad. And it also has this sort of legend right here, how many stepped yards, and gives you letters as to what is 2 feet from on the post, from two posts on dividing line to bottom of grave. So this is likely, I don't know if we know for sure, but very likely a soldier who was a Confederate soldier who dies at Letterman and then is buried, and then this is sent to his family to come in to retrieve his body. So this is one of my favorites.
That's one of the coolest objects I've ever seen in my life. It really is. It's
I want to finish on a bit of a high note here, and it sort of gets to the relationship between the town and the camp.
Yeah.
And that's the picnic, the big picnic that's held on September 23rd. The camp, and nobody, according to the local newspapers, nobody knows who really has the idea to do this, but they're going to have a big picnic on the campgrounds for people from town and for the wounded soldiers and for the surgeons. And it had, quoting again from the paper, great entertainment prepared for the wounded soldiers. The Christian Commission and the ladies of Gettysburg were involved. The paper calls it a perfect success. And here's what I copied down what they're eating. 400 to 500 chickens were served, 20 to 30 hams, 50 tongues, oysters, pies, and fruits. And the amusements.
Is that on the heavy diet, or is
I don't know what that was.
That's the holiday diet, I guess.
That was a lot of amusements. There were foot races, and in bags and not in bags. And then there was a band that came from York. So September 23rd was a pretty big day up at Camp Letterman to sort of celebrate the success.
And what's going on up here on September 23rd?
Oh, the last patients are leaving, and classes are starting on September 24th. So by that time, I would say, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm going to make this claim that all of the patients are out of hospitals except for Letterman. So November 20th, the day after the Gettysburg Address, is the day that Camp Letterman closes for business. So it has been, at that point, open for just a touch under 4 months, August, September, October, November. 4 months. Over 4,000 soldiers have gone through. Many have died, but many more have survived. Nurses are starting to go home. Doctors are going home. And town is beginning to return to some semblance
of normalcy, except for the disease that lingers.
Yeah, well, and that's another story for another day.
It is. I'm setting you up here. I'm teeing you up.
Right. I see some questions on the chat have come in. Rob Williams, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. Phil asks, is there a marker? Yes, there is a marker today. A little bit hard to get to. If you're on the York Road and there's McDonald's, and then right next to it is it's called CR Auto Fleet. It's an auto dealer, and directly across from the auto dealer is a War Department marker for Camp Letterman. So that's really the only.
Well, there's also an interpretive marker.
There is on the parking lot of Giant. Right.
And there's a new marker that has gone up next to the sheets on the Camp Letterman Drive.
See, I don't go out to John. I haven't been to John.
I don't know why. I think I must have accidentally come across the one because it's badly faded and it's hard to read. But there is one on the eastern side of the parking lot at Giant.
Every time I'm in that parking lot, I'm trying not to get killed.
Well, it's like many parking lots in Gettysburg. It's kind of a crapshoot. So. But there actually are 3 markers, but one is right down there on the York Road. There's a place to pull off. Just as you pass the McDonald's, you can kind of pull off.
And it's on the opposite side from the McDonald's, by the way.
Yeah. There's a big open field off to the right that's going to be between where the Arby's is and where the Starbucks is. I mean, it's right in between those two.
Is the graveyard still there? Carol asks. No, I'm pretty sure that all of the soldiers were either sent back home or in the National Cemetery. And in fact, there's another connection here to the seminary hospital. There's a patient named Michael O'Loughlin who's wounded. He's in the 13th Massachusetts, and he's wounded on Oak Ridge on July 1st. Ends up in Christ Lutheran Church. 2nd Division 1st Corps Field Hospital. Then he is moved up here where his leg is amputated at the knee, and and then he's sent out to Camp Letterman, and that's where he dies and initially is buried. Well, the connection, in addition to his leg being amputated here, is that we have it on display. His amputated knee joint was sent to the Army Medical Museum, and we borrowed it from them and have had it on display. So I wrote in our member portal, I wrote a piece about Michael O'Loughlin. Why did Jonathan Letterman leave the Army of the Potomac in 1864? Part politics and part, and maybe even more so, he had had enough. He had had enough of 2 years of hard duty, and he and William Hammond leave around the same time. Hammond is the Surgeon General, and a lot of the success of the military machine of all of the Union armies, not just the Army of the Potomac, but is due to the working relationship, the good working relationship between William Hammond and Jonathan Letterman. And they trust each other and they work well together. And Hammond gives Letterman a lot of leeway to doing what he feels is right. The other part of that is the good relationship between George McClellan and Jonathan Letterman. And Letterman had known McClellan's father, I think had been a professor of his. Mm-hmm. And so McClellan trusts Letterman and heeds his advice. So in summer of 1862 and then at Antietam, Letterman has pretty much blank slate to do what he thinks is right, which of course is what is the right thing to do. Yeah. Anything else?
No, that's all I'd had. So. Okay.
Annette did text me and she asked, where did I get the picnic description? It's from the Sentinel, the Adams Sentinel, September 29th or 28th or 29th of 1863, page 2.
I have a question.
What?
I do.
All right, you broke the third wall. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Well, and I know germ theory was still new or on the horizon. So the idea of miasma and bad air would make you sick. Did they just think that making it smell good would take it away?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why people are walking around with flowers and the idea of the pine boughs. Peppermint oil, yeah. There is a fantastic book. It's maybe 2 years old at this point, but it's called Smell Detectives, mm-hmm. And it's a 19th century olfactory history of urban America. And I know that it probably takes a special person to read that book, but I'll tell you, that special person is right. It is. If you want to understand miasmatic theory, if you want to understand how the people in the 19th century are making sense of their lived environment and disease, it's fantastic. Who wrote Smell Detectives? Well, good night, everybody. No.
There are some. I'm trying to think. There was the auditory history of 19th century America was really cool. And
Melanie Ketchel, Kiechle. You're welcome.
Keep talking. I want to find this auditory history too, because this is the smell and the hearing.
Yeah.
Things from the 19th century are really fascinating to me.
Is it it's not the smell of war?
No. This is the guy from this is Early Republic.
Oh, this is the one where you were talking about the train.
Yes. And what it sounded like.
Right.
In a city or a town in the 19th century. I'll have to come back to it. I can't find it right now. I've got a copy of it on my bookshelf at home. But
so what are we doing next month?
I don't know. What do we want to do? Let's see. It'll be September. Y'all got any ideas? Anything y'all want to hear about?
So
That's an open-ended question. Well, we'll come up with something
Yeah,
good.
we'll come up with something good. Yeah, Antietam.
Well, you know, you talk about Antietam. We could talk
Disease?
about disease. We could
Sure.
probably go down there. That's a
Fun topic.
That's a great topic. We'll have to do some work, but we can do it. What do you think?
You can always cover that in like post-battle Gettysburg when you were talking about
20th Maine?
returning to the
Some of your research you've been doing.
Yeah, on the environmental history.
Yeah,
What if we do that? What if we do that? And that'll or the flood that occurred in the seminary basement.
We can do both of them. We can.
Let's do I'll break out some of the stuff that I talked about in when I did the ABT presentation. Yeah. We have some great and that'll also give me a chance. I'll let you all in on one of the other things that I'm working on is the disease outbreak that takes place right here in the seminary in this winter of 1846-47. There is an outbreak of typhoid here in the building, and unfortunately, 4 students died. And again, it tells you it's a lot. And we'll talk about this next month. But miasmatic theory, if you're going to get nothing else out of what we talk about with these, is that they're thinking that doing ventilation is going to solve all of the world's problems. So,
in a lot of ways, that's true.
Yeah.
Air circulation is very, very important. When you start looking at what the mitigation policies that are being
right now,
hospitals right now. I mean, it's all about being able to create hermetically sealed spaces for people to be safe in hospitals. It's fascinating stuff. So yeah, disease is really cool. Starting with the flood in the basement is a good idea because if we think about environment more broadly, we get into these issues of impacts on landscapes.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We're 2 minutes to 6, so we will say goodbye so Robbie can go to his paint night with his children.
We're painting my favorite animal.
What?
We're painting my favorite animal, otters. So.
Oh.
Are they going to hold still?
Well, I mean, they're going to do the trace for me, and I'll fill in the, color by numbers.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to paint an otter, though.
Well, it's going to hopefully.
They have long teeth. They're really.
Yeah, you better get written permission from them otters before you go messing with them.
What's that?
Get written permission from the otters.
Yeah.
They signed a release. He finally got it.
You gotta get
All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Thank you.